Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with the Diablo 4 video. We're going to talk about a little recap after the campfire chat and the Season 5 PTR and what we need to know post or blog post they posted. So I made a few notes, a few things I want to mention in this. Not super excited about some of the changes and very excited about other changes and a couple of questioning changes that's coming in. And I wanted to address a couple of them in this video. So the first thing they're doing with the Season 5 is that we're going back to Hell, which is the first time we're going to do that in Diablo 4. Essentially, we're going to get what's called Infernal hordes, which is supposed to be sort of like sigils, if you will, which goes from difficulty tier 1 up to tier 8, where tier 8 is the equivalent of monster level 180 to 200. Now, for reference, the Nightmare Dungeon tier 100, which from a couple seasons ago was made to the equivalent of tier 70, is monster level 154. Now, if you have a fully leveled character and you have your glyphs leveled up and decent gear, Nightmare Dungeon 100 is not really that difficult. So the highest difficulty of Infernal Horde is a little harder than that. Basically, not super difficult in general. The way this is going to work is that you're going to go into the sigil, returning to Hell, where you're going to fight waves of monsters. And every wave at finish, to my understanding, you're going to be able to choose a boon and like a downside and a pro. What's going to be affecting you moving forward as you collect this area's specific currency, which is going to be used to opening up the reward chest at the very end, which they've made some changes to when it comes to deciding what type of rewards you can choose from. Anything from gold to even pit material, which I should be like, or target farming specific items. I think this is pretty cool, and the bosses you encounter are also the resurrected Trav bosses from the Mephisto areas back in Travincal in D2. It's actually really cool. I do like that. Pretty cool nostalgic approaches to it. I don't mind it. I think this is a really cool way to approach the game. They did call this or this type of end game focused content to be heavily replayable. Um, However, the problem I have with the heavily replayable state is that the highest difficulty, this to my understanding, what they said was difficulty 8, which is only a monster level of 180 to 200. And it feels like this is not going to be one of those heavily replayable aspirational content, but more like a heavily replayable type of content for the more casual approach. And that's been one of my biggest issues moving forward with a lot of the changes they've done in D4, that there's a lack of aspirational endgame content that is not beating your head into a wall, trying to beat one more tier or difficulty in the pit to get a tiny bit of higher quantity of the pit material. Not a big fan of it, as you might have noticed. So I hope that my hopes was that when they said they're focusing on endgame and replayable endgame content, that would be something people can actually have as aspirational content to engage with. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, I don't mind there being more options for endgame content where, for example, you can get pit material from the actual Infernal Hordes. I don't mind that, so I hope we're going to see more of this, but more in the lines of aspirational content that is not beating your head into a wall for endlessly scaling pits or greater rifts or whatever you want to call it. So that's basically what they're going for in this Season 5. So these are the compasses we talked about that opens up the Infernal Horde. So moving forward, some of the other notes I have was that they're making uniques getting better rolls. This is one of the ways that they're going to fight the loss of a temper modifier that we can get on legendary gear. They're going to be simplifying the stats when appropriate on some of these items, so that, for example, the Necro pants or the ring, for example, Ring of Men Down, won't have the I believe it was a lucky hit that was changed into summoning damage. That's apparently a way to simplify the scaling of that, even though the Ring of Mendel scales your damage, which I guess is my damage. It's a bit awkward. I don't like that as a pseudo solution to the not having access to tempers, but what they're also doing is that they're giving a one or two, we don't know, but they're adding tempering stats to unique items, which to my understanding, based on what they said in this campfire, is going to be locked modifiers, or maybe it's random. I'm not sure. I just don't understand the argument that they said that they are interested in opening or having the discussion of allowing us to temper unique items, but the risk of that is that then the unique items would just turn into a different colored legendary at that point, right? Because we can then manipulate the modifiers on a unique item too much. Now, I understand and see that perspective. The problem is that their argument here, their countermeasure to this, is to give the unique items a temper mod. And that's so awkward. One of the references they made in the video, in the campfire chat, was that, for example, a two-handed scythe or a sword would have a chance to cast an additional time for X ability. But if that's going to be hard locked into, say, Bone Spear, what about Bloodlands? What about Light? What about Blood Surge? I mean, there's like, it feels like they're just stepping away from a lot of these things. And another thing to mention when I mention the blood abilities is that the changes we see in these notes still renders blood builds very, very bad. I just don't see the fixes to them. And it's just awkward all around from my perspective, based on these initial notes that they made. Another thing they talked about was actually invulnerable builds, such as, Infinimus, for example, when it comes to the Necromancer's toolkit, is that the cooldown of your invulnerable abilities will only start after that invulnerable state has ended, so that Infinimus build can no longer sit and rotate inside a Blood Mist all the time. Now, I like the idea of this, not just for Necros, but for all builds across the board, to not be able to sit indefinitely inside Immortality. So that's going to be a very interesting change moving forward. There were some pretty cool changes to Shadow build specifically, with Shadow Blight Key Passive triggering more often, but it also comes at a cost of the Shadow Blight Key Passive damage scaling from Blight. That aspect was heavily nerfed in the notes here as well. I'll leave a link in the description to this post, by the way, if you want to look at the numbers. CC duration from enemies have been lowered yet again, by the way, and you can now use potions whilst being stunned, frozen, or feared. So essentially, they're giving us more player agency or control, so it doesn't feel as frustrating to be crowd control. So you get feared, frozen, stunned. You can still use your potions at least, if that will even save you. Not too fussed about that. I think that's a decent change for most people, and it's kind of welcome for more people than not. Reapers from the Skeleton, Book of the Dead from Necromancers, got both of the upgrades if you chose the second one, generating corpses. They also got the cooldown one. This has finally been fixed in the bug fix section of this notes. Another thing that was mentioning here was talking about temper mods that I briefly touched upon earlier. So temper's rolling the same mod all the time, which is very frustrating, and then the item is bricked, is something that they seem to be okay with having.
I don't like it. It's shit.
Exactly. So essentially what's happening is that they're allowing people to still have that happening. But what they want to do is not what I think the masses of the community would want them to do. I think a lot of people don't mind the idea that we can brick an item, but I think we wanted to have a bit more player agency. An example of that would be similar to the enchanting process, where you roll the temper and then you get to choose, do I want to keep what I had or do I want to change the new one? Because in more cases than not, there are more than one modifier of those recipes that would actually be a beneficial outcome. But you have to take the risk of, hey, I have the bad version. I can try to re-roll a new one, but I might end up with something I don't use. And that's really frustrating and will eventually, in more cases than not, brick your items, which is really frustrating, especially when you spent all your hard-earned gold on getting a double or triple greater graphics mod. So their countermeasure to this is to... Sorry for laughing, because it is very laughable. The countermeasure is giving players one more temper attempt per greater affix. Oh boy. Yeah. On another note, there are some good changes. Quality of life boss hunting, for example. BCDIs no longer require sigil dust to summon, and Varshan body parts is no longer 4. It is 1. And also the best thing that we saw so far, when you farm Duriel, for example, you go in with your group, if you're doing rotations, you go to the summoning altar, you summon the boss, kill it, and now everybody has to leave. Then we have to reset the dungeon. Then you have to run back in and then pop the next one. No longer needed. You can summon the boss, kill it. Directly after the boss is killed, you can use the summoning altar again to summon it right there and there. Now, I don't mind these things. I think those are good things, but it does add to the whole idea of speeding up the process of the game. On the other hand, I do like this change, but it also feels like more and more that the game is doing two things. One, you are going to, I'm exaggerating here, level to 100 in less than 8 minutes, and then get fully geared in less than 12 minutes, and then have the end game content done in the next 15 minutes. Another change that they've done to this is actually the whisper caches. In the current state of the game, at the time of this recording, you were able to do a health tide and not have a full whisper done. You'd have to go out of your way to actually do that mechanic to fulfill that. And now their change was that you can actually do a 10-point whisper cache inside the health tide. And their argument, or their statement was that this should take you about 15 minutes. And I feel like, what's the purpose of us getting rewards every 15 minutes it's just so much gratification, so many rewards showered on us for almost no work whatsoever. Like 15 minutes, now you get Whisper Cache. All right, great. Next health tide. 15 minutes, I get a new Whisper Cache. It's like, I just don't feel like it's content at that point. I feel like I'm just going there, spending 15 minutes for the sake of spending 15 minutes to get these rewards. And what then happens is that these dopamine kicks, it just gets over and over and over and over and over, showers of loot consistently. It's just crazy that it kind of loses its touch, especially with the way the itemization structure has worked and is working right now. Um, I don't really get excited dropping uniques unless they're greater affixed, and I guess that's kind of okay to some degree. But also, we have to understand the fact that I'm coming from a perspective, a blaster perspective, and not the casual Andy, which the game is catering to. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I wish the game would cater more to the idea of getting us aspirational content, making the game heavily replayable higher up, so that the game can actually thrive on that end, which I feel the game is lacking. Like even casual players will finish their level 100. Even casual players are doing the so-called aspirational content, and I believe that where the casual players are getting stuck is pit pushing for the simple fact that that is supposed to be, and you're going to hit a brick wall depending on your character, right? And then you have the problem of angel breath, which was not addressed, by the way, the lack of angel breath drops, and the lack of gold has been somewhat tackled, but the reality is that if you want to get the biggest items, you're not going to farm them. You're going to buy them, and the only way you can afford buying them is if you're also trading and selling the items. You get hundreds upon hundreds of millions of gold that you're not going to farm. So if you want to be able to do those things, you're going to have to join the idea of trading items and be part of that, which I'm very confident that most casual players don't even bother. So it just feels kind of awkward. But another problem with that when it comes to like the angel breath is something they've done with scattered prisms, where you're not longer going to auto loot them. Instead, they're going to be ending up in your little inventory window. And I've talked about this before. My problem with these things is a lot of the currencies in the game just exist for the sake of existing, but you don't really notice them or pay attention to them because you have so many of them that it doesn't matter. You loot things that have zero weighted value to your character, which just adds up to a random number in your screen. And the only currency that's done this in a really good way, in my opinion, is the gems. Because it took a bit of grinding and a bit of farming before I got enough shards or fragments to be able to craft fully high maximized gems for my entire character. That felt like a cool progression, whereas every other material in the game, except for angel breaths, is in the state of the game right now where you're getting so many that what's the point of looting them? There's no point. And now we have a loot pet that's going to pick them up automatically for us. So the purpose of them is to give us this false sense of dopamine where the screen explodes, a bunch of items and gold is raining from the skies, and oh, you're looting it, a bunch of numbers shows up. In the bottom left corner, you see these tooltips of what you just looted, these icons like, oh, you just looted 5 billion, sacred thingies. You looted 600,000 billion trillions veil crystals. But they don't do anything. It's completely irrelevant that you looted that. It's just for the effect and the cool colors and sound, and that just to me feels very off. I want to engage where the reward structure, where I feel happy that I exploded the screen and I picked up so much stuff. But in this current state of the game, with the changes they've done, the screen explodes. I shower all these, I vacuum them up. Just sit there with my doggo that picks it up, and all I can see is just a random number that means nothing that just got higher. It just feels awkward. And I don't like that personally. I'm really tired of that because I don't know. It's just, what's the point in them existing if we're going to have millions of them? Why is there an associated cost? Similar to the shards or fragments, whatever, runes, whatever it is, to even access the pit that apparently they cost 3 of this currency to enter. I didn't even know there was an associated cost till I actually read it and saw it. Why? Because it's never occurred to me that that was something I needed to think about, and it never is. It never was, and very likely never will be. So what is the purpose of having that currency? It's just so awkward. So we're going to go down to the Necromancer part. They made some changes. So here's some unique items. Path of Travel, unique boots. Bone Prison traps larger areas and shoots bone splinters. And it also increases your maximum essence for 2 seconds. By 2 for 8 seconds for each time these bone splinters hits an enemy. I'm assuming that's capped at 2, or unless it's 2 per. I'm not sure. We'll have to figure that one out. Unholy tether, mobility allows you to tether yourself with your golem and make you and your golem unhindered and gain movement speed for 6 seconds. I think it's pretty cool. Maybe be the new boot for minion builds, boot power potentially. Inexorable Reaper, the Sever now dashes you forward instead and becomes a mobility skill with no essence cost, but has a 22 or down to 7-second cooldown. So we're actually getting some sort of mobility skill this way. So maybe this will be the play. And actually, if we have the possibility to sacrifice an action bar slot, then we actually get our first decent mobility skill with a 7-second cooldown. But still, it's something. Creeping Mist mobility is getting evade cooldown reduction, but you can now evade during Blood Mist, traveling twice as far. So this is another way for us to do that, which is actually pretty cool. So I might actually look into doing this one for something like Infinity Mist, for example. Imprisoned Spirit is exploding in an additional time when it hits something inside a Bone Prison, dealing a little bit less damage on the second explosion, and it prioritizes enemies inside a Bone Prison. Tempering recipes, they have a new Necromancer wall recipe called, it's a defensive one. Necrotic Carapace ranks, kind of whatever. Ranks of Drain Vitality, kind of whatever. Minion damage reduction, blah. However, chance for your minions to attacks to fortify you for 3% of your life is actually pretty cool. So I'm not sure how high the percent chance is, but this one looks very interesting. And I believe we have some more Book of the Dead here. Necromancer minions attacks can now overpower, which I believe is 2 or 3%. Kind of nice. It is a damage upgrade, but it's so small, so it's like... Minions now are more aggressive and will automatically engage nearby enemies is the best change so far. So we needed some AI changes to the minions, and this is something that is definitely happening. So we'll see what happens here. The golem ability is that they are now leaping to the targets, which is pretty cool. And Iron Golem Slam increase got increased by 56%. Skill-wise, we got a damage increase on Sever, and the secondary damage got increased, and Lucky Hit Chance got increased on Sever itself. Blight got also dot damage increase. Blood Wave got a massive increase, but good luck scaling it, so it feels kind of irrelevant, even though this change is massive, more than twice as much damage scaling. You're not going to be able to use this in a proper way, which feels kind of bad. Shadow Blight got big buffs. Hits required reduced from 10 to 8, which is insane, and the damage from the actual Shadow Blight trigger is increased by twice as much. Hellbent Commander got a rather interesting change. However, the change is 2/3 of the previous damage scaling per node from 15 to 10, so it's 10% per node when you control at least 7 minions. However, you no longer have to be close to them. One of the biggest issues was that you had to be pretty close to them for this to even take effect. Now this will actually affect them, so this is actually, in the end, after a lot of arguments about this, a buff to minions. Blighted Aspect, like I mentioned earlier, the bonus damage has been more than halved. Instead of up to 120, it's down to 50% multiplicative damage scaling, but we're able to trigger this considerably more often. Bursting Bones, Bone Prison, burst damage increased. The weapon damage quite significantly. Not sure how I feel about the Bone Prison burst being damage increased, but it's kind of whatever. The other part is Empowering Reaper. Chance for Sever to create a Blight has been increased by 5% on the top end, and Blight bonus damage was increased by 20% at the top end as well. Multiplicative damage, by the way. Hungry Blood, additional Blood Lance damage is increased quite significantly as well, but still, with the current changes and what we've seen so far, it doesn't look like Blood builds are going to be a very high-performing build. They will definitely be playable. They're really fun to play, but they're not going to be top performers. Oh no, but just generic nerfs and Grasping Veins. Instead of having the critical strike damage bonus be indefinite, it only lasts for 6 seconds after hitting a target. The actual damage increase and the critical strike chance have both been reduced a bit. Cadaver's Aspect, instead of giving your next core skill some extra multiplicative damage, now after consuming a corpse, it will give all of your core skills damage for, which is a lower damage, but all of them will now work for up to 5 seconds instead of just the next ability. Torture's Aspect was kind of whatever, it's just the Iron Maiden for the stun. Blood Moon Breaches for the overpowering cursed enemies was increased by 30% extra multiplicative damage. Kruor's core skill, Kruor's Embrace core skill damage affix replaced with ranks that have ties of blood. Decent change, but again, I don't think it's going to be enough for the blood builds. This is what we were talking about before. The Ring of Mendel Lucky Hit affix has been replaced with summoning. Death Speaker's sorry, it's the worst unique in the game. Summoning skill damage affix have been replaced with movement speed. It's still dog shit, don't worry about it. And they capped the Wither Legendary Paragon to be capped at 1200 intelligence. And that kind of sums up like the most important things when it comes to the actual changes. Obviously, I'll leave a link down below for all of the changes in detail in the descriptions below. But again, let me know what you guys think about this. and my statements I made about the loot and whatnot. I'm kind of curious to hear what the guys on YouTube have to say about it. Anyways, I'm not going to prolong this video too long, so I'll leave you guys to it. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and until next time, as always, stay safe, keep rocking.